off with the panel.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Give me a wave if you can hear. Cool. That was a really nerve-wracking couple of minutes where we were wondering how many people are going to appear in front of us on this magical Zoom screen. And by a wonder of science, hundreds of you have appeared. So this is an incredible sight to see, and slightly nerve-wracking for us at the other end who are hideously ill-equipped with modern technology to deal with this kind of adventure. So we're going to try and get through it together in as much fun and as an interesting way as possible. Like all good festivals, we're in a festival venue. This is Hot Topics from the Tropics. And you might notice I'm currently sitting in the Eden Project office building, and just over the brow of my computer, I can see the twinkling of the rainforest biome. Now, many of you will have been to the rainforest biome and know what a magical place it is. And if this was a slightly more normal year, we could be having that conversation together in there, couldn't we? As we know, this is the most bonkers year probably any of us have ever lived through. But because of that, and because we wanted to keep connected, and because we wanted to keep having interesting conversations, the Eden Project team, and particularly the Eden Project Communities team, set up this virtual festival of discovery to allow us to all keep doing interesting stuff all together. So I'm absolutely thrilled that you are all here for this session today. The way this is going to work is I'm going to invite our panelists. We have an incredible panel here today with a huge range of experiences to share with us all. And I'm going to invite the panel to very quickly introduce themselves before we come back round, and I'll begin a bit of a dialogue with them. And then after that, in the content that's created there, it'd be great if we could hear from you and try and develop a dialogue together about the subject. So get your thinking caps on, get your questions ready, and we have a team monitoring all of that stuff to try and feed those questions to me. But like all of you, I have my chat open, and if the chat's going crazy, then I may miss some. So we're going to have to try and people flag that up to me. Okay, everyone happy? Everyone got a cup of tea, warm, dry, all look very comfortable. We have a super panel. Firstly, I would like Richard Betts from the Met Office next to university to say hi. Richard,
yeah, hello, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, it's great to be here. So yeah, I'm Richard Betts. I'm Head of Climate Impacts Research at the Met Office Hadley Centre, and I'm also a Professor at the University of Exeter. I'm a lead author with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and I'm also technical lead on the UK's National Climate Change Risk Assessment. And I've also done a lot of work on how rainforests and climate change interact with each other.
Thanks, Richard. And next to Alexandra, my colleague.
Yes, hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Alexandra Dixon. I'm Director of Special Projects for the Eden Project, and mainly concentrating on the wild projects. You're all familiar with the curated sites that represent a lot of Eden's work, but there are also now increasingly sites in the wild which demonstrate what Eden can bring to resolving issues in nature itself.
Thanks, Alexandra. And lastly to Ali, who I'm looking for on the screen. There we are. Ali from Cool Earth.
Yeah, hi. I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks. I'm Ali Skeets. I work for Cool Earth, and we work on preventing tropical deforestation with the ultimate aim to mitigate the climate crisis. So I manage a program in Papua New Guinea, which is home to the third largest rainforest in the world. And we work with a team there on the ground of local people living in villages to help them protect their forested land and meet their livelihood aims. And yeah, I hope I can share some amazing success stories from Papua New Guinea with you today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ali. Welcome to our panel. It truly is an incredible panel to get here today on this Saturday morning. Hope and Progress in a World on Fire is the title of this session. It's quite a provocative title, Richard. Greta Thunberg famously said last year that our house is on fire. You're one of the world's leading climate scientists. Can you tell us, what do rainforests have to do with climate change, and is our world on fire?
So rainforests and climate change are quite intimately connected, and they affect each other, in fact. So rainforests exist where they are because of the rain. It's in the name. You need a lot of high rainfall to maintain the forest, but also forests maintain their own rainfall to a large extent. You get a recycling of water between the forest and the atmosphere. So rainforests actually have an effect on the climate itself. They cool their local climate by evaporating the water and by producing cloud cover. They actually lock up a lot of carbon within them. So as we're pumping more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, about half of that, our emissions, are offset by carbon being taken up by ecosystems around the world and the oceans, including the rainforest, which is a huge store of carbon. So deforestation can be a major source of carbon emissions, as well as taking away this kind of free ecosystem service that we have of reducing some of the impact of our emissions. In terms of the question of is our world on fire, so that that's kind of a literal and a metaphorical thing, isn't it? We have seen an increase in fire weather, so that when weather is hot and dry, it makes fires more likely and more severe. That we've seen an increasing trend of that worldwide, mostly, and some of the recent catastrophic fire events, like in Australia and California in the last year or so, have had a climate change component. They have been made more severe by the hotter temperatures. So we are seeing that in a literal sense, and also in a metaphorical sense. The impacts of climate change more generally are becoming more severe, and it really is undeniably an urgent issue that needs to be tackled now. We need to rein in our impact on climate by reducing emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases quite urgently. But importantly, there's still time to avoid the worst. There's a little bit of an unfortunate sort of idea coming out that it's now too late and all is lost, which is not true. Although some climate change has happened already and some is locked in, we've not passed the point of no return. We're not locked into some unending process where it will inevitably lead to climate catastrophe. We can still avoid the worst if we take action rapidly. So that's the key message here. It's a serious issue, but it can be addressed.
Fab, thanks, Richard. I'd like to come to Alexandra. Alexandra, you've been lucky enough to work all around the world in forests and other ecosystems, many of which have felt the brunt of some of the most severe effects of climate change, probably far more than we feel in a bit wet and grey Cornwall like today. Could you talk about some of the threats to some of those places and where you've seen hopeful stories, where you've seen them recover?
Well, yes, and it actually leads on very directly from what Richard was just saying. I mean, we know that we're in a world of sort of disease and disaster at this point, and we know that our children really actually have every right to be very angry at the world that we have essentially created at this point. So one of the things, as Richard was saying, that the threat is serious, but there are situations which offer hope and which offer exemplars for what we can do in the future. And just to use two of Eden's principal projects in the wild portfolio, we're working in Chad, in fact, on Lake Chad, which is in the Saharan zone of Africa. And outside of the polar regions, the Sahel has been the most seriously affected by climate change in the last decades. And this has exacerbated a cultural situation of pastoralists versus agriculturalists, with deteriorating environments. Subsistence becomes even more difficult. You have the added problems around the lake of Christian and Muslims, and then you have Boko Haram. So about the worst case of challenges, shall we say, that we need to address. People are living, poverty doesn't even begin to describe how Chadians are living. And yet they recognize that their existences are very directly and very closely connected with their environments, which are seriously degraded. So we have a project with UNESCO where we are setting up exemplar sites as to how this process of the cycle, because it's a repeating cycle of degradation, poverty, displacement, insecurity, etc., how that can be broken. And I have to say that even, working in these very remote and very difficult circumstances, the response of the communities to come back and yes, we'll do anything you tell us to do because it's giving us options is a source of enormous hope. And these are displaced people who don't even speak the, French, Arabic, or English. So there are linguistic problems. You start with that. So it's quite it's quite an array of issues that need to be addressed, but that's what we're going to have to become more and more familiar with as we go forward. The point is that there are ways to change the pattern. And then the other project where the pattern has been changed is our project in Costa Rica, which is a tropical forest restoration program that 30 years ago, the land, it's approximately 3,400 hectares, was acquired in a series of small-scale purchases by a Danish entrepreneur. And he basically left it to recover. And now we have a project there with a restored tropical forest where we are looking to develop a whole program of biodiversity conservation, but very crucially integrated with local development and income for the people who are actually going to be living in the forest. And if they don't tolerate or actually even encourage the forest existence, it doesn't matter what we do, it will go. So that's another principal point, is that local involvement is absolutely critical, and telling the story, making people feel that they are part of a success and a change.
Thanks, Alexandra. And on the point of people living in a forest, can I come to Ali? For many of our perceptions, if we watch lots of nature documentaries, Attenborough and stuff, when they go to forests, it seems to me, and I've been to a few, that they do everything in their power to exclude people from those shots. So from many of our perspectives, it would appear as if people don't live there. But Cool Earth works very closely with rainforest communities. Could you talk about some of your work and how you do that?
Yeah, sure. And you're exactly right. And I think we're all slightly guilty of imagining these ecosystems without people in them. And yet the people, as well as people being dependent on the forest for resources, the forests are very much dependent on the people that are there. So I sort of wanted to start by asking everyone who's listened to imagine a rainforest and, all the dense trees, loads of wildlife, because rainforests are home to about 80% of plant and animal species. But add to your imagination the people and their homes, sports fields, gardens, and livestock, and try and make the forest into a kind of working landscape. Because the people who live there, they use the forest for their lives and for their well-being. And it's very similar to how we all use our environments. So when I've been to Papua New Guinea, I've seen children surfing on mangrove shorelines and young people standing in the shade under trees, listening to music on their phones. People kind of weeding their gardens, building their houses out of bush materials and growing food. And where Richard said that there's that intricate link between forests and climate change, there's also an intricate link between people and forests. And they shape the forests, the way they live there and the way they interact with it, which is why forest depends on people. So deforestation at the moment in the tropics tends to be clearances of quite small areas, generally less than 5 hectares. But when we think that 90% of people who live in extreme poverty globally depends on that forest, the small clearances are often to give them cash when they're desperately in need. So maybe selling timber for healthcare needs or in food emergencies. And we can't really expect them to stop using this resource. So if we combine the fact that people are amazing guardians of forests and shape that environment, but they also need to improve their livelihoods, our kind of challenge in our work is to make sure that people are able to use forests sustainably, have an income that they can trust as a buffer against poverty, and protect their tenure. And what Cool Earth does, and I think what we all appreciate, is we can do this best by listening to the people who live in the forests and working together to overcome those challenges for really effective forest conservation and well-being.
Thanks, Ali. Richard, I'd like to come back to you. We've heard from Alexandra and Ali about different ways in which forests can recover or be protected. What are the environmental benefits of that kind of work? What happens when this kind of work happens?
So there's benefits both for the ecosystem itself and biodiversity, and for the wider climate and system as well. So yeah, the forests are a natural habitat for other species, of course, but also, as I was describing earlier, they because they play a role in maintaining the climate that they've evolved in, and the people that live there have become used to, because that's why they live there. Then maintaining that forest will help to keep that cooling process of the rainforest through evaporation and cloud cover, and also maintain a carbon sink, which can help to reduce our global impact on climate change.
Thanks, Richard. We had a question from Bob. I think it's Bob, was it? And I'd like to send it to Alexandra and Ali. Hello, what can I do to help being 9 years old? Because we see these places as very far away, and we can often feel disconnected from them. If you were 9 years old, what could you do to help, Alexandra? I know that's a tough one.
I'm trying to remember what it was like to be 9 years old. I think at this point, the best thing to do if you're 9 years old is to, and actually I really encourage you to pursue this, because your generation is going to be the one that makes the difference. You're going to be the ones that solve it. And one of the big things is to learn as much as possible. And I know that everybody says that, and it kind of sounds a little bit tedious, but in fact, the more you can be informed, and I don't mean about sort of hardcore science or whatever, I mean about local people. What are the issues that really drive decisions? What do people care about? Not people in England, but for instance, people in the tropical forests that we're talking about. What are the issues that really that guide them in a day-to-day, how they're going to live? And I'll just use an example, which is that firewood is a major daily issue for a large proportion of the population. So the question is, if you are a mother, because it's usually the mothers or the women that collect the firewood, if you have 3 children, one of whom's on your back, are you going to cut the tree that's nearest to you, or are you going to go further and find one that is more appropriate but further? So understanding what other people are confronting, what their lives are like, is a major step towards being able to correct things. And so I would encourage, as much as you can learn about other cultures and how other people live would be the start.
Good answer. Ali, do you want to take a swing at that question? If you're 9 years old, what would you do?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's quite hard to, I'm quite out of touch with 9-year-olds. I agree with everything Alexandra said. And I also think that we can feel very far away from places where the tropical forest is, and also quite disconnected from the drivers of climate change. But if we sort of bring things home a little bit, what we can all do and what children can do is get involved in community conservation in your own areas. So in the same way that the people that we're working with in Papua New Guinea and Peru are looking to improve their environment, perhaps restore areas of forest for services like firewood or hunting, we can be involved in community actions that restore our environments and have a great impact on climate change. So perhaps there's some sort of park initiatives where you live, you could go and help plant plants, whatever they're doing to improve parkland. And doing this not only has an impact in your local area and on sort of increasing biodiversity and a small impact on climate change, but it puts you in touch with the way people living in forests work as well, and the way they think about their environments. And that creates this kind of global interconnections of thoughts, and that's something that you can build on. And as you grow up, you know, use social media to enhance your voice, align your views with NGOs that you believe in that are doing good work globally. Yeah, and follow through right to a career if you want to.
And Richard, can I ask you to come to that question as well?
Yeah, sure. And I've just seen in the chat that Bob has put that for his homework today, he had to make a biome, and he's done one of a burnt rainforest to remind us how we're destroying the rainforest. It reminds me, my son made a model of the biomes that he did himself when he was little. He's now grown up, but so that reminds me of that. That's nice. So what you can do as a child, I guess one thing is, well, one thing anyone can do is influence the people in real power to make a difference. We can all make a small difference ourselves through what we do, but big system change is also needed as well as what we do individually. So if you're a child, remind your parents that you'll be in the world hopefully a long time, that you and your generation will inherit this world, so they need to look after it when they are running the world at the moment. Help them to make choices in what they buy and so on, to sort of environmentally sustainable, and also to be involved in influencing politicians and so on, you know, voting, writing to people at the local council, members of parliament, letting them know your views and the kind of world you want to see and the kind of action you want to see. So influence other people, start with your parents and spread out from there.
Thanks, Richard. Ali, you began to talk about learning from different communities, and Alexandra's talked a bit about this as well. Are there fundamental differences, or are we actually really similar to people who live in some of these places around the world?
We're probably more similar than we might realize. We all kind of prioritize our immediate needs. And we're lucky enough here to have our immediate needs of kind of food security and healthcare met. And I think that similarity is what can allow us to, in Cool Earth, to collaborate with people living in the forest and understand what their needs are, and how working together to meet those is the best solution to helping them protect their forest and then mitigate the climate emergency. Some of the immediate needs, a really nice success story from Papua New Guinea is people in a village called Wabamari struggling to have clean drinking water. And this is something that I think we probably all take for granted. And in a neighboring village that hasn't had it, this resulted in people having to spend a lot of money on medical evacuations. And often this money, it risks coming from felling trees for instant cash. And so for Cool Earth, we've addressed their needs for getting clean water, which has allowed people to live a lot more comfortably in their land, and just by being there, protecting that forest from outside influences and not have to sell trees. So I think kind of aligning ourselves through thinking about our basic needs and what brings about well-being for us, and how well-being, how people living in forests meet their well-being and their needs, is something that's global and puts us all kind of on the same page of conservation.
Thanks, Ali. Alexandra, I wondered about your experiences in Chad, because is this the same when you're dealing with such extreme poverty?
Yes, I mean, interestingly, I talked about the Chad and the Costa Rica projects, but one of the things that I found when in sort of my previous existences is that there is a way into every single community, which is through the women. And you have, first of all, you have a shared and very interesting, it's a commonality of pain, of childbirth, of, you know, injury, etc. So that's, and it sounds funny, but if you're in a community where you don't speak the language and you're going entirely on body cues, finding, you know, the sympathetic, because they're watching some, in this case in particular, they're incredibly valuable water buffalo being treated for a tiger grab. And these women were just in tears because it was so painful for the buffalo. And so there's a commonality in that. There's also a commonality in mothers with children, because they want the same things. They want to feed their children. They want them to be educated. They want them to get out of the life that they are in now, or to have the choice to get out of the life. So that provides a very effective avenue to get into communities and to understand them better. And I think it's probably easier, I will say, for a woman to do that, simply because there are less cultural issues of talking to another woman. So I think the main thing is that actually when it comes down to it, everybody is concerned about sort of the same thing. And you just have to find out how you're going to achieve that in a way that works for them and that which creates the benefits that you're trying to secure for the ecosystem or the project that you are trying to develop. And I think it quite often talking, as Dan was saying, with talking, for instance, with Chad, the people, the communities on Lake Chad. I mean, there's poverty and then there's Lake Chad. It is just heartbreaking. And in fact, there's Chad. And there's nothing. There is nothing. And until something is done, until there's an infusion of some kind of assistance that we have to provide under the radar of Boko Haram, so that's an additional little consideration. But there are ways to do this, and we are doing it. We are setting up projects that are going to achieve results for people, and more to the point, which they can do themselves, because that's another major issue, is that whatever we do has to live beyond the involvement of Eden or Cool Earth or whoever. It has to be something that they want to do themselves.
Wise words. We have a question from Abby Whitfield, and if you can see it in the chat, can the panel elaborate a bit more on some of the causes and reasons for deforestation? We know there are multiple. Perhaps you could speak from your own experiences of things that you've seen. So perhaps Richard, could you go first? Could you elaborate on the reasons and causes of deforestation?
Yeah, so as you say, it's quite complex, and there's many causes, and the panelists will be able to add to this as well. But part of it is local people needing to use the land for their own economic benefit and survival is one, which shouldn't be forgotten. But there's also the industrial exploitation of land, for example, access to land for mining and so on. So quite often remote areas, roads will be cut into the forest to allow the sort of industrial activity to the lorries and machines to get there and to sort of and to actually do the mining deep in the forest, and those roads then can remain there, and they provide a new access route which then other people can then start to use the forest in other ways. So it's kind of the thin end of the wedge. And of course there's large scale agriculture as well, so turning some forest areas into pasture land for cattle, or replacing some with palm oil plantations as well. So there's a variety of different things going on. But yeah, I'll hand over to others as well if there's anything else to add.
Perhaps I can come to Ali next. You mentioned that lots of the rainforest deforestation that you see is actually quite small scale, which might not fit with our usual imagining that this is vast. We say something at Eden Project that we think is true. It's about as true as anything can get at any one moment, that an area of size of the rainforest biome disappears about every 11 to 13 seconds from the world, which feels like a huge amount. Could you talk about some of your experiences?
Yeah, I think that sort of large scale clear-cut clearance for palm and soy has actually decreased in the last decade. There's been, I guess, some progress in that area. But it's now this pattern of small scale clearances, and they still add up to an awful lot of rainforest being cleared all the time, like you say. And a lot of this is, from what we've seen in Papua New Guinea and Peru, is for income for people who don't have secure income, and also for their immediate resources. So the palm oil plantations in Papua New Guinea, for example, have shifted from very large areas to village palm oil, where local people are clearing small plots to grow it because they need the cash. And I think the best way to tackle this is working with the people there and asking what their cash needs are for, and can we address them in a different way? that allows them to keep their land the way they want it to be, and probably producing gardens and providing food security, as well as the kind of ecosystem functions of the rainforest.
Thank you, Ali. Alexandra, do you have anything to add to that?
So, well, I mean, I think that, again, we come back to the fundamental question, which is people living with the forests, with tropical forests of any kind, or in fact, any forest, have to have a vested interest in its continued survival. And we have to think differently from the way we think of what their priorities should be. And I'll just give a quick example of a project that I did in Nepal, which was trying to create benefits for the local communities around the Chitwan National Park. And we wanted for them to perceive that there were benefits from the existence of the park. And when you did sort of community consultations, what they wanted was not schools, it wasn't clinics, it was a veterinary service, because they could not invest in their animals if there wasn't a veterinary service, because it just represented too much of a risk. So that was something everybody was surprised, because they assumed it was going to be a clinic. But the brutal reality was that for them to elevate themselves out of poverty, they needed to have fewer but better animals. They didn't, and it had serious environmental consequences, benefits, because a good buffalo, a productive buffalo, is not allowed to free range near tiger zones. So it meant that we kept, diseased animals from going into the park, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I'm saying about thinking how they think, what makes the difference for them. And that's what we need to be innovative and creative and understanding, because none of us have a concept of what it's like to come from generations of impoverished people and not see any future that's not going to be impoverished.
Thanks, Alexandra. Hope that answers your question, Abby. If you'd like to come back on it, then write in the chat and we'll try and pick it up. There's a question from Bethan. We've spoken a lot about local people's use of forest, but haven't mentioned the consumption habits of the global north, i.e. how much is our fault in the global north? Could I come to Richard?
Yeah, I can start on that one. So, yes, everything is incredibly interconnected these days. The global supply chains are huge and complex. So one way, if we want to sort of reduce our impact on the global environment, not just rainforests, but climate and other ecosystems as well, is to consume less, to buy less stuff. Everything you buy has to be made somewhere and shipped somewhere. All that often requires using land, but it also requires consuming energy, much of which is based on burning fossil fuels, which drives climate change, of course. So that's one way to reduce your actual carbon footprint, is to just not have so much stuff made for you all the time. In terms of the land, food in particular is a huge part of this, meat is a source of it uses more land basically. Animal agriculture it's actually less efficient to use the land to farm animals as it is to grow plants. Although I would say I'm not a vegetarian myself, but I'm eating less meat these days than I used to, and I've been cutting out beef for a while as well, because that's particularly has a particularly high amount of methane emissions, which is another greenhouse gas associated with it. But not only that, food waste is a huge issue as well. When you buy food and then you don't eat it and you just throw it away, which often does happen, then the land has been used unnecessarily for that. So you waste that use of land, you wasted the energy involved in transporting it to you. And even worse, food waste going into landfill also creates methane. It gets buried underground in anaerobic conditions, it's called, as it rots down. Methane is a very strong greenhouse gas. So landfill food waste is awful. So basically, don't waste food and buy less stuff is one way in which we can have an impact.
Thanks, Richard. Could I come to Alexandra next? You've got your hand up, I think.
Yes, one of the things I would say is that when everybody likes to shop at Primark and all of these various places that sell t-shirts for £3 or whatever it is, there is a consequence there, because those are being created and made by overseas where there are no restrictions, there are very few labor laws, etc., and they're being created by some, whatever you want to call it, by impoverished and desperate people who need the work. And something that people need to consider is that there is a consequence in that whole supply chain that's coming to you in your high street, that there's a long chain behind that of consumption, of exploitation, and of absence of regulation. So I would encourage people to spend that little bit more, buy fewer, but buy better.
Oh, good advice. And Ali, is there much to add? We've had a terribly interesting question come in that that you might like to take a swing at, which is there much research to suggest a link between COVID-19 and deforestation, which you might want to link together with this idea about the global north?
Yeah, there's no hard research at the moment to suggest that deforestation itself has necessarily caused COVID-19, but there is plenty of research to suggest that deforestation and altering habitats could lead to the next pandemic. We know that increasing human-wildlife interactions through loss of wildlife habitats and driving wildlife into places where people live can increase the risk of zoonosis, which is where a disease passes from an animal to a human. So continual clearing of rainforest is very likely to exacerbate this problem. We've also seen a whole tragic full circle of this, where COVID-19 has in many countries increased deforestation, because I know in Indonesia there's been cases where park security guards were not able to patrol due to lockdowns, allowing entry of illegal loggers. And often with lockdowns, food security got even further compromised in rural areas, so people were clearing forest for subsistence. So there's this terrible cycle of deforestation leading to potential pandemics and then worsening through this circle. So, I mean, that's another massive reason, as well as the climate emergency, that we need to prevent deforestation as much as possible.
Thanks. It's a really topical subject, and could you? We've had another question come in that's from Jocelyn. Hi, Jocelyn, wherever you are. I can't see you on the screen. Britain helped fund projects in Guyana to pay them to stop cutting down existing rainforest. Could this approach not be repeated in PNG, etc.? So this is the idea of, would anyone show their hands if they'd like? Alexandra would like to have a go at this.
Wow. Yes, I think, sorry, I've got lots of ideas. The thing of it is that, yes, paying to not chop down the forest, but the question is who's getting the money? Because there's quite often a big gap between the government that receives the money from the British government and the local communities, who wouldn't know what to do with big sums of money anyway, because they have no experience of it. So I think that it's one of those solutions that one thinks, yes, that would be a good idea and it would be easy, but actually on the ground, it doesn't necessarily work. So it's not the all fix. It's not to say it doesn't work in some cases, but it's just something that you need to do carefully.
Thanks, Alexandra. Ali, would you like to?
Yeah, I can add to that. And actually, it's not dissimilar in a way from some of the work Kula has done on a much smaller scale, so not paying governments. There's a concept of a conservation basic income, which is providing cash to people to meet their immediate needs, but not with a conditionality of not damaging the rainforest or the environment. And Kula, since the beginning 12 years ago, have given unrestricted cash, cash that doesn't have restricted spends, to community leaders in Peru, and allowed the people who live there to decide the best way to spend it, to protect their land and meet their needs. And we have seen really good successes in that. We've seen, I think, in the Ashaninka, the areas where we've done this sort of direct giving, has seen a decrease in the rate of deforestation compared to neighbouring villages. And although it is quite different from the Guyana example of giving to a government, there are parallels there, and cash giving where it can meet people's basic needs could be a really good thing for conservation.
Thank you, that's a good explanation. On the subject of money, we've had a few comments and questions come in the chat about the idea of our wallet being our weapon, which is a phrase Eden uses quite a lot, actually. And it kind of completes that bit of story about money. Perhaps I can come to Richard. Richard, you've said you've cut down on meat, but what can I buy with my limited money to make an impact in the rainforest?
Oh, right, okay. What you mean in terms of food, you mean, or what?
How, if you were to say a couple of things that we could go out into the supermarket and buy with our money that can have a positive impact on rainforests around the world, what might they be? So it could be, for example, I was thinking one could be something that we don't buy, so we choose to buy something else. Or another thing, is there anything that we can buy that is pro-rainforest?
Well, I think things which grow there naturally, I guess, bananas is one obvious example, other fruits and so on. If of course they're produced in a sort of sustainable way by the local communities, usually using sort of traditional practices and so on, which have been evolved over time. So this kind of stuff which is sort of supposed to be there in a way is probably the best answer I would have thought. Nice.
Ali, Alexandra, would you like to? Is there anything we should avoid and anything we should go out and buy?
Well, I would say that, I mean, we're increasingly looking at ways, when I said earlier about looking at innovative ways of creating incomes for forest communities, and there are growing supply chains. I'm thinking of Lush, for example, where there are projects where there's a specific, a product from the forest, let's say, is used in a soap or a bath bomb, whatever that is, that is actually generated in the forest and is part of a community program that creates income. And it's a whole supply chain from the forest to you. And those are definitely products that I think we should encourage people to buy, as opposed to, ones that don't have a chain of responsibility, if you like. Somebody had said that the whole question of palm oil is a nightmare issue, and one that, quite often we're told that, oh, well, we've cut down the trees, but we planted trees in their place. Well, if those trees are all palm trees for oil production, it's, not doing anything for anybody except the local, the owners of the palm trees. So I would say just look at things more skeptically and be more selective, because there are ways of supporting those products which are generated responsibly and ethically.
Thanks, Alexandra. Ali?
Really, just to echo what Alexandra said, is to spend a bit of time looking at labels, which I know we do a lot anyway. Look for products that support those processes of sustainability, because we can't always, it would be impossible to boycott something like palm oil anyway, it's everywhere. But we also have to appreciate that things like palm oil, cacao, coffee, these are great sources of income for people who really need it. But what we can do is look for sustainability labels, things like shade-grown coffee or cacao that are grown in the sort of under the canopy of the rainforest, not requiring clear-cut destruction. And yeah, spend a bit more time. I know we don't even go to the shops anymore, but looking at labels of things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so complicated. If you could come to Eden, it's actually one of the things I think we're really strong on is, as you trail around the rainforest biome, is to get stories about consumption and where we can have an impact. So when you are all allowed back, please do come back and take in all that stuff. We're into the last 10 minutes or so of the session. So I'd like to come back to the original premise, this hope and progress in a world on fire. What we've seen is that rainforests and our connections to them are perhaps even more complicated than we all imagined. We're connected to them in such vast and intricate ways. Could I come to Richard? Are you hopeful? Are we making progress? With all the news in 2020 being about COVID, it's been quite hard to discern whether we are or not making progress on some of this stuff. How do you see it from your perspective?
Yes, I think we are making progress, and I think in the last couple of years we've seen a huge ramping up of very vocal concern from the general public worldwide about wanting to address these environmental issues more urgently. And I think we talked about, there's a question about COVID earlier, wasn't there? And I think one of the things that we've learned this year is that the impact of the global lockdown has shown us both what we can do and also what the limits are of what we can do are in terms of having an impact on environment. This also ties into a question I saw earlier about are we saving the environment by staying at home? There was a question from a 7-year-old child on the chat. So we would, by not travelling so much in the earlier part of this year, we did actually substantially reduce carbon emissions quite a lot, and that showed that actually big behaviour change can happen when it has to. Of course, it doesn't come without a cost, so that needs to be borne in mind. But even though emissions were reduced, it didn't really stop the buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it just slowed it. So it also showed us how much more of a challenge that we still have to do. But it did show that we can make a difference when we put our minds to it. So in answer to the question about if you stay at home, does that save the environment? It does if you only ever leave home in a car or an airplane. But of course, if you leave your home and go on a bike or walk, then that's not emitting carbon. So you don't have to stay at home the whole time. You just have to think about how you do your travelling and be lower carbon in that way.
Thanks, Richard. I'd like to come to Ellie next. Are we making progress? Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful, yeah. I think some of the hope sort of in the UK and globally comes from, for me, the fact that these discussions are being had so much more often. And I think that engages people, instead of feeling kind of, oh, I can't do anything, and these feelings of despair, is like, I'm part of this conversation, and my small actions, even if they contribute minutely to the progress, they're part of something bigger, and people using their voices to drive this kind of hope towards mitigating climate change. And I also get a lot of hope from the people in villages in Papua New Guinea and the stories I hear from Kulos, other partnerships in my work. I see the way people's attitudes are who are living in the rainforest when they want to protect it, not just because it's their land, but also because they have pride in their land and pride in their resources and how they can be used in their families and in their clan groups. I also look at Facebook sometimes of some of the people in the villages we work with in PNG, and I see, you know, they're posting photographs like we do of sunsets, photographs of their landscapes. And I think this kind of love of the environment and the people in tropical forests have of their homes, and that we all have of our environments. You know, I love the sea here in Cornwall. This gives me hope that the drive is there and the conversations are being had now, and I think that's a great thing for our progress. Yeah.
Thanks, Ali. And Alexandra, same to you. Are we making progress? Are you hopeful?
I'm guardedly hopeful, because I think that there are instances, I mean, I've spent my whole life in conservation, and, you know, if you look at the overall picture, it's deeply depressing. But if you look at, you know, all we're doing, what we're doing effectively are drops in the bucket, but the more drops that people put in, you know, the better the bucket will be. So I encourage every effort that is actually trying to stop the tide of destruction. And I think that those efforts are increasing, and if you like, the next generation, Bob and his cohort are already ready to go. They don't need to have the lessons. They've already seen it. So they're starting with energy and commitment and determination. And I think that's a big thing. The second thing is, and I never thought I would really say this, but I think technology is going to have a big role to play, because even the poorest of the poor in Chad have phones. And this is a way of communicating, of working, especially if we can bolster the signal, so to speak, but it's a way of communicating, of bypassing political problems. I mean, we can actually teach people in Chad from Cornwall on how to grow balanites trees to increase the oil production. We don't have to physically be there. And I think that is also going to be a huge asset for the future, because it means that even if we're stuck in Cornwall, I still have every 2 weeks a long conversation with, the folks in Chad. And it means things can carry on. And I think that's going to be a huge asset for the future. And also, Bob's generation, it's like mother's milk, as opposed to all of us, you have to sort of spend time learning the stuff. They've already got it. So, and they think that way differently. So I think those are two major elements of hope for the future.
Brilliant. The chat is going crazy with a complete mix of questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but there's stuff like, is new generations of nuclear power plants a real answer? Maybe I can get a nod from Richard, yes or no.
It's part of it, I think.
Part of it.
Yeah.
A real question about skepticism, which Alexandra's mentioned. There's so much conflicting information out there. Who do you trust? Perhaps you have to develop trust with organizations, be they news organizations or NGO organizations, which Alice talked about. You have to find your color, as it were. We don't have long enough, I don't think, to delve into who do we trust, but you have to develop it over time. Another one from Jocelyn: can Richard explain more about fires in Siberia and Russia? I don't think in the 5 minutes left, but why it's confusing that cold places burn, isn't it, Richard? Can you give 1 minute on that?
Yeah, well, because cold places are now getting hotter and drier, basically, and the heat wave that happened in Siberia was unprecedented, and it wouldn't have happened without climate change, and we're now able to say that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks. Bob, are we planning any children's events next year? Yes, we are. We're planning a whole series of events, and fingers crossed that we get back to some version of normal soon and we can start having fun together. I'm really desperate to get back to things like this when Eden isn't empty, and we can have in-person festivals again. But to close, I'd like to ask you all one question. We've been so used to politicians and scientific experts standing up on a soapbox for the first lockdown every day and telling us stuff to do. Stay at home, wear masks, whatever it might be. If you had that platform for one day and that press conference where you knew almost everyone in the country was watching, what would be the one thing that you stood up and said in order to help protect rainforests? Can I go to Alexandra first? Imagine you're Chris Whitty for a moment, but you're on the subject of forests.
No, that's not happening. Well, I'm trying to be cogent. I think the main thing that, in fact, COVID has demonstrated is that nobody's unconnected. And what's happening in the Congo Basin, where pangolins, et cetera, were caught and then are provided for the Chinese wet market, where they're not supposed to be at all. I think that has demonstrated to the world that the interconnectedness is profound and extensive, and nobody can ignore that. Or if you do, it's at your peril, because this COVID, and when they talk about, all right, it was bats who gave the pangolin the COVID. All right, well, they also reckon that there's something along the lines of 13,000 other strains of COVID. And that's just COVID. So I think that's one issue I would say. The other thing is, I would say that unnatural systems of food production need to be very fundamentally investigated. And yes, it's animals from Africa in the wildlife market, which I don't even want to think about how dreadful it is. Pangolins in Chinese food markets intensive intensive farming in the, in our country, where animals are on, antibiotics, and we have chlorinated chicken. That's admittedly a US one, but still all that is deeply unnatural. So of course things are going to emerge, and all of our, our armory of weapons are not going to work. So those would be my 2 points off the top of my head.
Okay, let's go to Ali next. 1 point, 30 seconds.
Oh, one thing.
You're Chris Whitty for a moment.
Oh, yeah, but I'm not either. I think never feel like you're powerless. And we all have voices, and we recognize the voices of people in the forest, but we also recognize our own voice and use it. Like, align with NGOs who share your views to increase your voice, speak to your local MP, use your voice and make it more powerful through whatever means you can.
Brilliant. And Richard?
I was going to say what Ali said, so I will add to that and say, write to the supermarkets and so on that you buy for, and explain your consumer choices. So don't just do it by what you buy, but tell them about it as well.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And on that note, I'm desperately sad that I think we're going to have to bring this session to a close. Firstly, a huge thanks to all of the audience who've taken time out of your Saturday morning to join us. There is a whole program of events going on for the rest of the day, including even Mr. Motivator. Can you believe that we are sharing a bill with Mr. Motivator? Part beautiful and part horrifying thought. I am even more convinced than ever that it is our duty to be hopeful, but we have to turn that hope into action, don't we? And we've heard loads from Alexandra, Ali, and Richard, and all of the commentary about how we might do that. We're all different. We all think differently and care about different stuff. And you just have to find the stuff that you're passionate about, because we all can't do everything. This is a huge puzzle that we need to solve, and we have to play our little bit in that. We can't expect Richard to study everything on his own. We can't expect Ali to work with every community on her own. We can't expect Alexandra to save rainforests everywhere. We've all got to do our bit, and finding your bit of that puzzle is the kind of key to all this stuff. So thank you so much for joining us. I think I saw a hand up. Was that Lindsay? Did you put your hand up? Oh, it wasn't you wanted. Okay. So fingers crossed you can all come back and see us in Cornwall next year. But one thing that COVID has done is meant that we are going to do much more of this kind of thing. We're finding our feet on the internet, probably just like all of you, and we're spending far more time on things like Zoom than we ever thought possible just a year ago. But we really hope to see you all soon, and thank you so much for your time here today. I think Chana just has a couple of things to say.
Thank you so much to our amazing panel today. That was a very interesting discussion. I wish I could pick your brains for the rest of the day. That was really valuable and such a great way to kind of start our Saturday mornings with, right? Thank you also to everyone who joined us today, all of our listeners here. For anyone who would like to hear more about climate action, I will actually put another session that we have happening right after our lunch break in the chat here. So thank you so much everyone for attending. The festival, of course, is free, but if you would like to donate a little bit to our causes here at Eden Project Community, so I'll ask my colleague to put a link in our chat just now as well. And I think with that, one more final massive thank you to our panel. And that is it for us for this session. Thank you so much all for joining. And
thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
It was great. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.